Picture this. You're in like a sterile, high-pressure television writer's room in 1987.
Right, and the pressure is just absolutely off the charts.
Exactly. I mean, you've been given this massive mandate to create the ultimate terrifying new adversary for the reboot of, well, the most famous science fiction franchise in history.
You can't just phone that in. You need a home run.
Right. So on paper, you write up a species that is completely devoid of human morality. They are cunning, they're unpredictable, and they're driven entirely by, like, the cold, calculating logic of pure hypercapitalism.
Which is such a chilling, philosophically brilliant pitch,
It
honestly.
really is. I mean, you can't reason with them because their only god is the balance sheet, you
Well,
know? So the network is thrilled. The build-up lasts for weeks.
Oh, the hype was real.
Yeah. The velvet curtain is finally pulled back on national television. And, well, four men with giant rubber foreheads leap onto the screen, jumping on foam rocks, hissing like cornered feral raccoons, and wildly swinging what appear to be glowing neon party streamers.
It is arguably one of the most magnificent, jarring misfires in the history of television production. I mean, it really is.
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We are looking at a giant stack of production notes, critical reviews, and historical retrospectives surrounding Season 1, Episode 5 of Star Trek, The Next Generation.
Right, an episode titled The Last Outpost.
Exactly. And for the uninitiated, this is the very first on-screen appearance of the Ferengi. The mandate was to introduce a threat so severe it would anchor the new series, you know?
Instead, we got a masterclass in how a brilliant concept can stumble so badly out of the gate that it forces an entire production team into literally years of damage control.
Okay, let's unpack this because we are going to look at the chaotic growing pains of early television writing. We'll explore how low budgets and rush pacing can completely undermine a narrative.
And how this specific disaster accidentally laid the groundwork for one of sci-fi's most durable creations. I mean, the autopsy of this episode is incredibly revealing.
Right, because whether you're a diehard sci-fi fan or just someone fascinated by the creative process and, well, failure, there's so much to learn here.
It highlights a fundamental truth about creative endeavors, you know.
Yeah.
Having a visionary concept is completely useless if you lack the mechanical, day-to-day tools to actually execute it.
Yeah, and in 1987, the team behind the show had incredible ambition, but they simply did not know how to steer the massive ship they had just built.
They really didn't. They were flying blind in a lot of ways.
So let's actually look at how they steered that ship straight into the rocks right in the opening minutes, the inciting incident of this entire story.
The chase sequence.
Right. The USS Enterprise, the crown jewel of the Federation, a city in space carrying over 1,000 people, is flying into uncharted, potentially hostile territory.
In a high-speed pursuit of a Ferengi Marauder vessel.
Yeah, and why are they risking a multi-billion credit starship and the lives of everyone on board? Because the Ferengi stole a T9 energy converter.
A piece of Federation property. Let's just pause and genuinely analyze the sheer, unadulterated bureaucratic absurdity of that setup for a second.
It is wild.
Right? I mean, the Federation is portrayed as a post-scarcity utopian society. They have essentially limitless resources. They can literally synthesize matter out of thin air.
Yeah, they have replicators. They can make anything they want.
Exactly. Yet Starfleet Command has apparently authorized their flagship, commanded by Captain Jean-Luc Picard, to chase an unknown, heavily armed alien species into the dark void over what amounts to a stolen battery pack.
It is the equivalent of a fully crewed nuclear submarine engaging in a high-speed, wrong-way chase down a metropolitan freeway because someone stole a hubcap.
That is a perfect analogy. It completely defies the logic of the universe they are trying to build. You just don't send the flagship to do the job of a local mall cop.
No, you really don't. And you know what the punchline to this entire absurd setup is? Once the Enterprise and the Ferengi ship crash into the same mysterious force field around a dead planet called Delphi Ardu.
The T9 energy converter is literally never mentioned again.
Never. It just vanishes from the script entirely. It's like getting into that car crash with the submarine and the hubcap, crashing into a haunted house and just completely forgetting about the hubcap.
It is a textbook example of a purely disposable MacGuffin. And this speaks directly to the mechanics of 1980s syndicated television writing, you know.
How so? Like, they just didn't care about continuity.
Well, the writer's room wasn't trying to craft an airtight legal procedural about stolen Federation property. They had a mandate to introduce the Ferengi in Episode 5. That was the goal.
Right. They needed an excuse, any excuse, no matter how flimsy, to get Picard's crew and the Ferengi crew orbiting the same planet at the same time.
Exactly. They were so desperate to get to the A-story reveal of this new species that they completely sacrificed basic plot resolution and character logic just to get there.
See, I am having a hard time letting the writers off the hook for that. I really am. You can't just abandon the inciting incident of your story halfway through Act 1.
It is incredibly sloppy, I agree.
Yeah. Because if the entire motivation for the chase disappears, the audience subconsciously realizes that the stakes aren't real. The writers are just moving action figures around on a set.
That is the danger of writing backward from a set piece. When you prioritize the destination over the journey, the seams of the script become painfully visible to the viewer.
Yeah, they wanted the big reveal. But let's talk about the pressure behind that reveal, because the behind-the-scenes context here is crucial to understanding why they rushed it.
Oh, absolutely. The structural necessity for the franchise was massive at that time.
Right. Why was there such a huge push to introduce the Ferengi in the first place?
Well, the original Star Trek in the 1960s relied heavily on the Klingons and the Romulans as their primary terrifying antagonists. They were basically stand-ins for the Cold War paranoia of that specific era.
Yeah, the classic, Soviet stand-ins.
Exactly. But by 1987, the geopolitical landscape had totally changed, and the internal universe of the show had evolved along with it. The Klingons were essentially allies now.
Right. They even placed a Klingon officer, Worf, on the bridge of the new Enterprise.
Which was a huge deal. And the Romulans, well, they were being held back for later in the series, so the writers desperately needed a new big bad to unify the audience against a common threat.
So they looked at the core philosophy of the Federation, this idyllic, socialist, post-scarcity utopia where nobody uses money and everyone works for the betterment of humanity.
And they asked themselves, what is the dark mirror to this?
Right, and the answer they came up with was the Ferengi, a society of hyper-capitalists, a culture where greed isn't just a byproduct of a broken system. Greed is the actual moral framework.
What's fascinating here is that, conceptually, it is brilliant. It really is.
It's a great idea.
Right. If you want to threaten a society that values philosophy, diplomacy, and shared resources, you introduce an enemy that assigns a strict monetary value to every single interaction.
Yeah, an enemy that views diplomacy as a weakness and human life as a commodity to be liquidated. I mean, you cannot appeal to their better nature because they fundamentally don't believe in one.
Exactly. It is a philosophically rich antagonist that perfectly fits the cerebral, thoughtful tone that the next generation was trying to strike.
But, and this is a massive but, the translation from that cerebral concept to physical on-screen reality is where the tragedy occurs.
Oh, it's just a total train wreck.
We go from philosophically rich hyper-capitalists to what actually aired. 4 actors in restrictive prosthetic makeup hunched over, leaping from foam rock to foam rock, and snarling their dialogue.
The production notes we have explicitly highlight the costume design, pointing out that their outfits look like they were assembled from a, quote, garage sale on the planet.
Right.
Ridiculous.
I mean, fur vests, strange padded trousers, oversized codpieces. It is impossible to look at them and see a highly advanced spacefaring threat capable of challenging the Federation.
The failure here is largely an issue of visual language. If you look at successful alien villain introductions in television, the visual design always perfectly communicates their specific threat.
Like who? What's a good example of that?
We'll take the Borg, who were introduced a bit later in this very series. Their visual design perfectly communicates what they are.
Right. The Borbs are cold, mechanical, silent, and uniform. It instantly signals that they are an unfeeling collective. You just get it immediately.
Exactly. The Ferengi, conversely, were supposed to be cunning and calculating. But their design, the exaggerated oversized ears, the filed teeth, the erratic simian body language the actors were directed to use.
It communicated feral wildness, not calculating intelligence. The visual language completely contradicted the thematic premise they spent weeks hyping up.
It did. It actively undermines the menace. And there's a specific moment we have to highlight here involving their weapons because it's just so telling.
Oh, the energy whips. Yes, we have to talk about the energy whips.
The energy whips are a fascinating artifact of early production budget constraints, meaning bad creative choices.
They look like glowing animated party streamers. I mean, they do not look like something that could pierce the hull of a starship or vaporize a person.
No, they look ridiculous, and the episode itself accidentally proves it.
Right. There is this scene where one of the Ferengi tries to intimidate Commander Riker, the imposing first officer of the Enterprise.
A huge guy, by the way. Very physical presence.
Yeah. So the Ferengi lashes out with this neon streamer, and Riker doesn't even flinch. He doesn't dive for cover. He just stands there looking mildly annoyed, like a mosquito is buzzing around him.
Which is a cardinal sin of writing a villain. When the protagonist refuses to respect the threat, the audience is immediately given permission to stop respecting it too.
Wow, that's such a good point. It completely neuters the villain right there on screen.
You cannot build a multi-season adversary if your own heroes treat them like an inconvenience rather than a mortal danger.
So true. Contrast that with, like, how Darth Vader is introduced in Star Wars. He steps over bodies, literally lifts a man by the throat with one hand, and the rebel soldiers are visibly terrified.
Yes, the threat is established through the reactions of the people around him. Riker's lack of reaction fundamentally breaks the illusion of danger for the Ferengi.
I want you to imagine being in a corporate boardroom, right? Your CEO has been hyping up a massive, hostile takeover attempt by this ruthless rival firm.
You're bracing for these wolves of Wall Street to walk through the door. The tension is palpable.
Exactly. The doors open, and four guys in literal clown shoes scurry in, hiss the whiteboard, and threaten you with a pool noodle. You wouldn't be scared.
No, you would look around the room trying to figure out if it was a prank for a hidden camera show.
That is exactly the energy this episode radiates. It's just so uncomfortable to watch.
And that bizarre energy bleeds directly into how the episode handles its pacing and its crisis mechanics.
Right, because the writers seemingly realize halfway through that the visual introduction isn't working, so they violently pivot the plot to strip both crews of their agency.
It's a huge mechanical shift. So the dead planet they're orbiting, Delphi Ardu, turns out to be an ancient T-Con outpost.
Yeah, the automated systems of this long-dead empire suddenly activate, grab both the Enterprise and the Ferengi ship in this tractor beam, and begin draining them of all their power.
Suddenly, the weapons don't work. The engines are dead. The life support systems are failing.
The Enterprise is literally plunging into sub-zero temperatures. You can see the actor's breath. It is a ticking clock where the entire crew is going to freeze to death in the dark.
Now, structurally, this is actually a highly effective way to force a character study.
Yeah.
By neutralizing the technology, the script forces the leaders of both vessels to rely entirely on their management styles.
It isolates the human element, right? Or, well, the alien element.
Right. The audience gets to watch Captain Picard and the Ferengi Captain the Daemon deal with the exact same life-or-death claustrophobic pressure cooker.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because the contrast between the two command styles is arguably the single best part of this otherwise messy episode.
Oh, absolutely. On the Enterprise, things are getting incredibly grim. The lights are dimming, the crew is visibly shivering in their uniforms.
But Picard is a rock. He isn't pacing the bridge. He isn't screaming at the science officer to fix it faster. He is methodical.
He calmly asks for status reports, analyzes the data, and manages the psychological state of his crew. He's a stabilizing force.
Meanwhile, the Ferengi captain is just completely falling apart. The script describes his reaction to the power drain as, quote, considerably more shouting.
He is paranoid, assuming the Federation is somehow orchestrating this elaborate trap to steal their technology. He paces, he panics, he makes completely irrational demands of his crew.
The erratic behavior completely strips away any remaining illusion of them being a calculated, intelligent threat. But I want to focus on Picard for a second.
Sure, because this is a defining moment for his character.
Yes. This quiet, freezing crisis establishes the entire blueprint for who Picard is going to be for the next 7 years.
You have to remember, veteran viewers in 1987 were used to Captain Kirk.
Exactly. Kirk would have been ripping panels out of the wall, demanding more power from engineering, maybe trying to physically fight his way out of the situation.
He was a man of action. But Picard sits in his chair, sips his Earl Grey tea, and trusts his experts. He is not a traditional action hero. He is a crisis manager.
It is a radical departure for television sci-fi protagonists of that era. The writers use this episode to teach the veteran audience how to watch this new show.
The heroism of the next generation is not going to be found in swagger or physical brawling. The heroism is going to be found in extreme competence under pressure.
I love that. Picard's greatest weapon is his profound emotional regulation. It really sets the tone for the entire series moving forward.
It does. But unfortunately, the episode immediately undermines that beautiful character work with a massive case of tonal whiplash.
Oh man, the tonal whiplash is so bad. The show simply cannot decide if it is a tense survival thriller or a slapstick comedy.
Right, there is this scene where Picard and the bridge crew finally get a clearer visual of the Ferengi on their view screen.
The recalibration scene.
Yes. And you can see the actors almost breaking character. They go through a visible recalibration. They are bracing for these tactical masterminds, and they see these hopping, snarling creatures.
And the crew's reaction borders on comedy. They just look at each other like, are you seeing this?
The script is actively fighting itself. The text demands that the situation is a dire emergency, but the subtext, the performances, the costumes, the reactions, is playing as total farce.
The episode is suffering from a massive identity crisis, and nothing exemplifies that identity crisis more than the B story involving Data, the android officer.
Oh, the joke storyline. We really need to dig into this because it's so symptomatic of the era.
Right. The ship is freezing, hundreds of people might die, the tension is supposed to be unbearable, and what is Data doing?
He spends a significant portion of this life or death episode trying to remember the punchline to a colloquial ancient Earth joke.
He is stuck in a processing loop about a comedy routine while people are freezing. And he finally remembers it and delivers the punchline out loud, right at the climax of the episode when everyone's nerves are completely fried.
This is a perfect illustration of the rigid, often destructive mechanics of 1980s syndicated television writing.
How so? Like, why force a joke in there at all?
Because shows were rigidly structured. They were required to have an A story, the main plot, and a B story, which was usually character development or lighthearted relief.
Ah, I see.
The writer's room felt an obligation to service Data's character arc of trying to understand humanity. In a more mature production, they would have realized that inserting a comedy routine into a survival thriller completely shatters the tension.
But in season 1, they were just checking boxes on a whiteboard.
Exactly. A story, freezing ship. B story, Data learns a joke. They just smashed them together without any thought to how the tones would violently collide on screen.
Okay, but I have to ask you a question here because I was thinking about this. Is there a world where this jarring, weird tonal collision is actually a brilliant piece of realism?
Okay, I'm listening. What do you mean?
Think about it. If humanity actually makes first contact with a truly alien species, it isn't going to have dramatic lighting and a swelling orchestral score, right?
Sure.
It is probably going to be awkward, filled with miscommunications, bizarre cultural faux pas, and annoying technological glitches. What if a hostile alien species is just profoundly irritating rather than majestically terrifying?
That is an incredibly generous, retroactive reading of the text.
I mean, I'm trying to give them some credit here.
It's a fun intellectual exercise, certainly. Real first contact would absolutely be messy and profoundly anticlimactic, but we have to analyze this as a piece of television.
Fair enough.
And as a piece of television, the messy reality of the production is that they simply didn't know how to balance their narrative elements. They were trying to juggle high-concept sci-fi, quirky character beats, and a new villain introduction, and they just dropped all the plates.
Yeah, that's the truth of it. But right when you think the episode is a total loss, right when you're ready to just turn it off, it does something extraordinary. It violently shifts gears again.
The away mission.
Yes. The away teams from both ships beam down to the surface of the dead planet to find the source of the power drain. And the pacing of the episode completely changes.
It's like you're suddenly watching a different show.
We go from the frantic, noisy, hissing Ferengi and the freezing Enterprise to this quiet, solemn, atmospheric set on the planet. And they wake up the guardian of the outpost, Portal.
Gordel is the last surviving sentinel of the Tikon Empire. And this entire sequence is where we get a glimpse of the true, unadulterated science fiction grandeur that this show would eventually master.
We really need to assess the originality of this character because the ancient, powerful being waking from a slumber is one of the most overused tropes in the entire sci-fi genre.
Oh, absolutely. Normally, when the ancient being wakes up, they are an arrogant, angry god.
Right. They shoot lightning from their eyes, they demand sacrifices, they put the lesser species through some sadistic, violent maze to prove their worth. It's almost a cliche.
Exactly. But Portal is written and performed with a completely different energy. The actor plays him with a heavy, weathered dignity.
Yeah, he's not acting out of malice or some giant god complex.
He is a loyal soldier who has been standing at his post entirely alone for incomprehensible amount of time. He interrogates Riker and the Ferengi, not to torture them, but because it is his sworn duty to protect an empire that he doesn't realize is already gone.
That realization is the emotional anchor of the entire episode. It is a stunning 5-minute detour in the middle of all this chaos.
It really is.
Portal is demanding to know why these strange ships have violated Tikhon space. He is asking about the glory of his people. And Commander Riker realizes what is happening.
He has to break the news.
Yes, Riker has to stand there and gently, respectfully break the news to this impossibly old, immensely powerful being that his empire is dust. The Tikhon Empire collapsed hundreds of thousands of years ago.
They have been dead for longer than human civilization has even existed. The weight of deep time in that scene is beautifully handled.
It's so sad.
It explores the tragedy of impermanence. No matter how advanced or powerful civilization becomes, time eventually erases it.
The series would later build entire award-winning episodes around this exact theme, but here in episode 5, it is just a fleeting moment of brilliance buried in a very messy hour of television.
And it sets up the most fascinating philosophical contrast of the episode.
Right, because Portal, trying to process this devastating information, essentially puts humanity and the Ferengi on trial. He needs to determine if these new species are worthy of surviving.
The Ferengi instantly recognize that Portal has the power to crush their ship with a single thought.
And how do the ultimate hypercapitalists respond to an existential threat? They grovel. They point at Riker and literally say, "The humans are the enemy. We are your friends. We can offer you our services. We can make a deal."
It is the ultimate failure of their worldview. They attempt to apply the logic of the marketplace to a cosmic, philosophical entity.
They believe everything, including their own survival, is just a transaction. They are completely willing to sell out humanity to save their own profit margins.
But Riker doesn't play that game. He refuses to grovel. He refuses to bargain. He stands his ground.
And this is where Riker's earlier lack of reaction to the energy whip actually pays off.
Oh, that's a great connection.
Right, he isn't intimidated by the Ferengi, and he isn't going to cower before an ancient god either. Instead of offering a bride, Riker quotes Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Quote, "Fear is the true enemy, the only enemy."
It is a brilliant piece of writing. By quoting ancient Earth military philosophy, Riker demonstrates to Portal that humanity possesses historical depth, wisdom, and an understanding of the nature of conflict and peace.
He meets Portal on his own terms as a warrior and a philosopher.
And Portal is impressed. He recognizes the sophistication of humanity and agrees to release both ships.
But the underlying genius of that resolution isn't just that Riker wins, it's why the Ferengi lose. They lose because they have nothing to quote.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is the sharpest piece of world building in the entire script.
Why is that?
Because if an entire civilization is structured exclusively around the pursuit of profit, the accumulation of wealth, and the logic of commerce, they do not fund the arts.
Oh, wow, yeah.
They do not spend centuries developing military ethics or philosophical treatises. They only read the ledger.
They showed up to an open book philosophy exam and all they brought was a calculator.
Exactly. It exposes the inherent fragility of a society built solely on greed. When they are confronted with a challenge that cannot be bought or sold, they are completely empty-handed.
They have no cultural or moral foundation to draw upon.
It is a devastating critique of hypercapitalism, but as the production notes point out, it is a brilliant point that the episode hasn't really earned, because the Ferengi have been acting like jumping caricatures for the previous 40 minutes.
Right. You can't deliver a nuanced critique of corporate greed when the avatar of that greed is hissing at a foam rock. It just doesn't land.
It really doesn't.
And this brings us to the broader historical context of what this episode represents for the series as a whole. This is the definition of growing pains.
Yes. The Last Outpost is a microcosm of the entire first season of The Next Generation. It's a transition episode in the truest sense.
The creative team was attempting to map a completely new universe, but they hadn't established the vocabulary of their own show yet.
They kept reaching for these massive, mind-bending concepts: ancient fallen empires, cosmic guardians, deeply satirical alien cultures. But their ambition was sprinting miles ahead of their execution.
They simply didn't have the steady hand required to hold those ideas at full size. And I think that's incredibly relatable, honestly.
Relatable how?
Well, anyone who has ever started a major creative endeavor or launched a startup or even just started a complex new job knows this exact feeling, you know?
Oh, absolutely. The imposter syndrome phase.
Right. On day one, your vision is crystal clear. You know exactly what you want the final product to look like. but you lack the muscle memory, the practical tools, and the subtle skills required to actually build it.
Your early attempts are clumsy, you use the wrong tools, you
Right.
panic.
You end up with a hissing Ferengi in a fur vest.
But the crucial takeaway is that the production team didn't give up on the core concept. They recognized that the physical execution was a disaster, but the underlying idea, a society acting as a dark mirror to human greed, was fundamentally sound.
So they began a long, slow process of fixing it, from hissing menace to something much more interesting. How exactly did they save the Ferengi from being just a footnote of terrible 80s television?
Well, it required years of deliberate recalibration. In their subsequent appearances on The Next Generation, the writers systematically walked back the physical threat level.
So no more jumping on rock.
No more leaping around. The hissing was completely eliminated. The glowing party streamer whips quietly vanished into the prop department vault and were literally never spoken of again.
Thank goodness.
The writers pivoted them from physical menaces to persistent, annoying opportunists. They dialed the threat way down.
But they didn't truly unlock the potential of the concept until the franchise launched a completely different show, Deep Space Nine, several years later.
Deep Space Nine is where the Ferengi were finally given the narrative environment they needed to thrive.
They weren't villains anymore, right?
Exactly. The writers abandoned the idea of making them straightforward villains and instead turned them into the focal point for complex social and political satire.
We get characters like Quark, the bartender, played with incredible nuance by Armin Shimmerman. And ironically, he was one of the actors in the terrible makeup in The Last Outpost.
Talk about a redemption arc. Shimmerman goes from jumping on foam rocks to delivering some of the most searing, insightful monologues in the entire franchise.
Deep Space Nine introduces Quark's family, his brother Rom, his nephew Nog, and suddenly, the Ferengi aren't a monolith of greed.
They are a fully realized culture with internal contradictions, political struggles, and genuine heart.
The masterstroke, though, was the introduction of the rules of acquisition.
Yes, providing a codified religious text for their greed. It allowed the writers to use the Ferengi as a brilliant satirical lens to examine modern corporate culture, labor rights, and the ethical compromises of commerce.
They stopped trying to make capitalism physically scary and started making it philosophically fascinating.
That's the perfect way to phrase it.
Because Quark isn't going to jump out of the shadows and hit you with a whip. He's going to sit down across from you, offer you a drink, smile warmly, and systematically dismantle your bank account while making you believe it was entirely your idea.
That is a vastly more effective, compelling execution of the original concept. The evolution from The Last Outpost to Deep Space Nine proves that a disastrous debut does not have to be a death sentence for a good idea.
It really doesn't.
The core framework was always prescient. It just required the creators to endure the embarrassment of their early failures, learn from the tonal clashes, and find the right narrative environment to let the idea mature.
So what does this all mean for us? I think that is the ultimate takeaway from unpacking this messy, chaotic hour of television.
What's that?
When you look back at the terrible costumes, the abandoned plot threads like that T9 converter, the inappropriate jokes, and the quiet tragedy of the ancient Guardian, we are looking at the necessary forge of creativity. Those embarrassing early stumbles aren't signs that the idea is bad. They are the required stepping stones to get to the masterpiece. You have to get the low-budget energy whips out of your system before you can write something as brilliant and enduring as Quark and the rules of acquisition.
This raises an important question, though. It forces us to consider a much larger, somewhat uncomfortable parallel regarding our own civilization's development.
Okay, where are you going with this?
We looked at the contrast between the Ferengi panicking in the dark and humanity's calm, philosophical resilience on the Enterprise.
And Riker essentially passing the test of deep time with Portal.
Exactly. I want you to imagine if a being like Portal, an ancient, dormant guardian of immense power, were to wake up today on our planet, right now.
Oh, man.
And it judged 21st century humanity based entirely on our very first frantic, unpolished interaction with it. The ultimate first impression.
That is terrifying to think about.
Would we genuinely pass the test? Would we step forward with the calm dignity of Captain Picard, managing the crisis without panic? Would our leaders stand firm and quote ancient philosophy to prove our cultural worth? Or, in our desperation, in our rush to secure technological advantages and protect our economies, would we look exactly like the panicked, erratic, profit-obsessed Ferengi, leaping around and shouting about our own importance while trying to cut a deal to save ourselves?
I really want to believe we would be the stoic philosophers in that scenario, but looking at the world today, I worry we might be the guys in the bad costumes, desperately waving around our ledger books, hoping the ancient god cares about our quarterly
It
earnings.
is a profoundly heavy thought to leave on.
It really is. Well, that brings us to the end of today's deep dive. We have sifted through the ruins of the Tikon Empire, survived the freezing dark of early television writing, and tracked the incredibly bumpy evolution of one of sci-fi's greatest satirical creations.
It had been quite a ride.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. Keep seeking out the messy histories behind the media you love, and keep looking for those aha moments in the unlikeliest of places. Until next time, we hope you remember, sometimes the most profound, enduring wisdom is found directly on the other side of a spectacular failure.